Imagine standing knee-deep in freezing mud, your skin soaked for days, the stench of blood and rot lingering in the air. Around you, men groan, some silently pray, others just stare into nothing. No birds, no silence, just distant rumbling thunder, not from the sky, but from artillery tearing apart the earth. Welcome to the First World War, not the noble, trumpet-blaring version from schoolbooks. Number this was the war where time stopped, humanity bent, and survival became a twisted lottery. And today, on Off the Map, we're not pulling punches. We're diving into 5 brutal realities of World War I that your history teacher didn't want to dwell on. These were the quiet killers, the soul breakers, the unseen enemies that made even bullets seem like mercy. So get ready. It's muddy, it's haunting, and it's just beginning. Let's start with something horrifyingly slow. It didn't explode, it didn't shoot, it didn't even scream, it just crept up your legs and killed you from the ankles down. Trench foot. If you've never heard of it, consider yourself lucky. Imagine your feet soaked in cold water for hours, then days. Skin softens, turns pale, then grey. It breaks, it peels, it oozes. The pain is relentless, like standing on glass shards dipped in acid. By the time soldiers noticed something was wrong, the rot had already begun. It was common, disturbingly common. In 1914, British forces reported over 20,000 cases. That's 20,000 men losing the fight not to the enemy, but to their boots. Some had toes amputated, others lost entire feet. And the worst part, it could have been avoided with dry socks. But in a flooded trench with no relief for weeks, dry socks might as well have been a fairy tale. Every step felt like a punishment. And if the rot didn't get you, the infection might. What makes trench foot truly terrifying isn't just the physical pain, it's the betrayal. Soldiers signed up expecting bullets, maybe bayonets, but not this. Not a death that slowly crawled up your leg while you stood there watching. As if the war wanted to remind them, not even your body is safe. This wasn't just discomfort. This was body horror, live, pulsing and silent. But if trench foot shattered the flesh, something even crueler was waiting above the shoulders. Because some men lost more than toes. They lost their minds. Shell shock. It sounds like a bad day, like a temporary state of confusion. But for the men in the trenches, it was an invisible executioner. One day you're fine, the next you're paralyzed, or screaming, or wandering in circles convinced the war never ended. Shell shock was psychological collapse, but no one knew it back then. Doctors called it cowardice. Officers called it laziness. Families didn't know what to call it. But to the men who lived it, it was a permanent detour from reality. Picture the sound of artillery, constant, endless, bone-shaking blasts. Not just for minutes, for hours, days, weeks. The brain wasn't made for that. Nerves frayed. Minds unraveled. Men stared at walls and forgot their own names. They stammered. They twitched. They wept without knowing why. It wasn't weakness, it was war trauma, with no name. Today we'd call it PTSD. Back then, you might be sent to the front again, or punished, or locked away, because fear apparently was a crime. The worst part, no one believed them, not really. If you had a bandaged arm, you were a hero. But a broken mind? That just meant you weren't trying hard enough. One British soldier was court-martialed and executed for desertion. His last words were barely coherent. Later, it was discovered he had severe shell shock. He didn't run. His brain did. The tragedy? He wasn't alone. Thousands suffered in silence. Some never recovered. Others carried the war with them until their last breath. Shell shock was the ghost that never left the trench. And while the mind crumbled inwards, something even more insidious began creeping in from the air itself. Gas. Imagine breathing in and your lungs start melting. That's not poetic exaggeration. That's mustard gas. It was colourless, or yellowish, or green, depending on how your day was going, but always silent, always cruel. First, it burned your eyes, then your throat, then it blistered your skin. And if you inhaled too much, you didn't scream, you gargled because the gas didn't kill instantly. It made you suffer, slowly. Some soldiers coughed for days before death came to shut it off. Mustard gas seeped into uniforms, clung to boots, soaked into soil. It didn't just attack you, it stayed with you. You couldn't wash it off. You couldn't see it coming. Even worse, it could take hours before symptoms showed. So men would joke, eat, smoke, not knowing they were already dying. Gas masks helped. Sometimes. If they were fast. If they were lucky. If the mask wasn't cracked or missing or simply too late. The first time Germany used chlorine gas in 1915, it sent French troops running in blind terror. Some dropped dead within minutes. Others survived but never spoke right again. The weapon was outlawed later, but not soon enough, because the message had already been delivered. Even the air wants you dead. In a place where breath was betrayal, no soldier ever truly rested. They slept with masks on, woke up to coughing fits, trained themselves to recognize the faintest whiff of danger. Mustard gas taught a terrible lesson. Survival wasn't just luck. It was paranoia, constant, suffocating paranoia. But even if the gas didn't reach you, something else would. And it had more legs than you'd like to imagine. Rats. Big ones. The kind you wouldn't expect outside of a nightmare or a New York alley. They weren't visitors in the trenches. They were residents, breeding, thriving, and feasting on corpses. That's not a figure of speech. These rats fed on the dead, grew fat and bold. They weren't afraid of humans. They ran across sleeping soldiers, gnawed on open wounds, chewed through packs. And they multiplied, quickly, in the walls, underfoot, behind your back. You were never alone. Then came the lice. Tiny, persistent, everywhere. They lived in uniforms, in blankets, in hair. They caused trench fever, a condition that could knock a soldier out of action for weeks. You could boil your clothes, burn your bedding, shave your head, and they'd still come back. Some men gave up. Hygiene became a joke. Baths were rare and water was for drinking or bleeding, not scrubbing. Every itch was a reminder. Your enemy wasn't just in the opposite trench. It was on your own skin. Together, the rats and lice turned the trenches into a living, crawling, biting nightmare. Disease spread fast. Morale dropped lower. You couldn't fight nature with a rifle. And when the biting stopped, the cold took its place. Winter in the trenches wasn't a season, it was a sentence. Rain turned to sleet, sleet turned to ice. The mud froze, cracked and cut. Fingers went stiff, toes blackened. Breath hung in the air like ghosts. And with every drop in temperature, another body dropped from frostbite. It happened fast. You'd lose feeling, then colour, then function. Nose, ears, fingers, toes. Once they went numb, you knew what came next. Sometimes it was gangrene, sometimes it was amputation. But it was never mercy. The irony, fire was everywhere on the battlefield, but warmth was rare. Trenches weren't built for comfort. They were pits, holes in the earth with sandbags and bones. When winter hit, soldiers froze to the walls. They slept in shifts, rubbing each other's arms just to keep blood moving. One man wrote in his diary, "It's not death I fear. It's waking up frozen and wishing I hadn't." The cold didn't discriminate. Officers, privates, young boys who'd lied about their age, they all shivered the same. Sometimes frostbite and trench foot teamed up, making walking impossible. So men crawled, on hands and knees across ice and mud and barbed wire, just to get somewhere slightly less miserable. If war was hell, then winter was its cruelest architect, and yet soldiers endured it because they had to, because dying from the cold still beat dying from a sniper. Now, take a step back. Picture all of it at once. The gas, the filth, the madness, the ice, the rats. Picture the mud sucking at your legs, the air itching in your throat, your mind fraying with each boom in the distance. And somehow, you're supposed to hold a rifle. You're supposed to charge. You're supposed to write letters home about hope. This was the First World War. The one with honor and parades and medals, right? The one in textbooks? Not quite. The truth is, World War I was a meat grinder of the body and the soul. The front lines weren't just lined with sandbags, they were lined with silence. A silence so heavy it swallowed screams. What made it worse wasn't just the suffering, it was the forgetting. The way these realities got edited out of the tidy versions told later. The way pain was rewritten as bravery. But here on Off the Map, we dig up the stories buried in mud, in trauma, and in truth. So next time someone calls World War I just history, remind them of this. It was a war where rain killed more than rifles, where silence was loud, and where heroes walked with frostbitten feet over rats and gas just to survive one more hour. If you want more stories like this, raw, real, and long forgotten, subscribe to Off the Map, because history isn't just what happened, it's what hurt, and we're here to tell it.